Welcome. We are delighted to have you here at the Priscilla R. Tyson Cultural Arts Center for our Conversations and Coffee program on this 27th day of the month of February. We did it, huh? We got through February. You want to clap and reach? Yay! I'm Ellen O'Shaughnessy, coordinator of the program. We celebrate coming together with Franco Ruffini, our loft gallery artist. Welcome, Franco. And we're so glad to have you with us, and your story of being born in Italy at Verona is just wonderful. And you can possibly, while you're presenting, share some of the story of your coming from a wonderful Italian, heritage. Franco said that he began making objects from non-ferrous metals, copper, silver, brass, in 2012. And as you were retiring from the Ohio Historical Society, where you worked in historic preservation and archaeology, you moved into this world. How grateful we are, because your metalwork is informed by your interest in the arts and crafts movement of the early 20th century, Japanese design, prehistoric vessels, and plant forms. Franco began his craft by taking classes here at our beloved Cultural Arts Center. Almost all the work in this loft gallery has been completed or worked on through Metal's jewelry studio here at the Cultural Arts Center. How wonderful. I can tell. You radiate that in your eyes. You love us. Franco has also taken workshops at the Jewelry Studio Design, Penland, Picosin, Touchtone, and the Metal Arts Academy. Franco has taught workshops at Ohio Wesleyan University in Delaware. He has his own studio in Columbus and continues taking a class at the Cultural Arts Center where he enjoys mentoring others in raising techniques. Franco continues to experiment with the transformation of two-dimensional sheets of metal into three-dimensional hollow forms, which you're going to tell us about, huh? Exciting. The top of the sheet becomes the interior, while the bottom becomes the exterior, a magical topological shift that continues to fascinate him. Franco tells us and shows us more, and you will, of your amazing work and the story of how it came to be. So as you come to the completing of this hour, you're going to take us out about 1:45, and we will enjoy seeing the work in the gallery. Meantime, you're sharing your work here and in conversation together. So take it away. Yes.
Thank you, Ellen. All right, what I'd like to do today is talk a bit about my work that you'll see exhibited in the gallery. And I do want to underscore the fact that when this idea for an exhibition came up, what intrigued me about it was the ability to show what was done here at the center. So I just think that's a tribute to this place and what one can learn from good instructors when one has no experience in metalwork. So I started here about 12 years ago, and let's see here, advance the slide. I'll show you some of my first steps in the metalwork. I started doing metalwork and made very simple forms. These are the first three pieces that I made here at the center from left to right. The very first piece, second and third piece. And as you can see, they're very simple ovoid forms. They were raised. I had had no experience in metalwork before, and in fact, they really didn't teach raising here per se as a class. but the instructor I had allowed me to start directly in with raising. So these are examples of my early work. This is the very first piece. It was about a 6-inch diameter flat sheet of copper that was hammered into this shape and then patinated with liver of sulfur. Another view of it. Second piece I made here, this was raised asymmetrically. In other words, I didn't raise this particular vessel from a central point, but rather from a point that was off-center. And so it created this opening that's not round, but more oval in shape. And then I used gold leaf in the interior to highlight the difference between interior and exterior. Another view of it. And this is a very small piece. It's about 4 inches tall. And I was just playing here with changing the shape from the bottom, which is round, to the top, which is a pentagon. And again, gold leafing the exterior. What's common to all three of these forms is that they're very simple. There's very little surface texture or design. So I was concentrating on creating a form and differentiating the interior from the exterior. I was encouraged to take an actual jewelry metals class here because some of the things I wanted to do required riveting, sawing, things that went beyond just using a hammer on a flat sheet of copper. So I did that, and that allowed me to do this piece. Again, a very simple form, but I embellished it by making barbed wire out of sterling silver and riveting it to the exterior of the form. This piece is called I Said No. And then, again, learning to rivet and solder, I made this pendant. And so it involves all those techniques, sawing out the pieces, dapping those pieces of copper, soldering. And this piece is interactive, I guess. You can rotate each of those hemispheres to create an all gold pendant or copper. If you have a bad day and the dark side comes out, you can turn everything in one direction or the other. So.
How big is that piece? Like,
It's about this big. It's out on exhibit.
okay.
Yeah, but it's probably like that.
Cool.
All right. Okay, so again, simple forms, and then I took a class with David Wong, who does vessels and chases those vessels very dramatically. And I took a beginning class with him, and this is the first piece I made in that class. Again, it was a simple copper form, but then we filled it with wax. He uses wax. Other people that do chasing use pitch, which is a tar-based substance, but this is filled with microcrystalline wax, and then using a variety of chasing tools, which are essentially punches that you hit with a hammer with different ends. You can get different textures or create lines, push surfaces in, etc. So all of this is work from the outside, so it's chased. Some of you have heard the term repoussé, that's working from the other side. So all this work is from one side only.
Hey, Franco, how do you get the different colors on the outside of the vessel?
Okay, I use primarily liver of sulfur, which is potassium bisulfate. Yeah. And you mix it with water and you have a solution, and then you get your copper very, very clean. You dip it in, and depending on how many times you do that or how strong the solution is, you get different color variations. This is the interior of that vessel. And when I made this one, what struck me is the interior and the exterior, although related, are very different. And I really like that juxtaposition of an interior and an exterior. Let's see here. Another piece that I did, this one I called Vortex. Very simple piece. This one is very small. It's about 2 inches by 2.5 inches. And the exterior and interior, again, look very different, but they're obviously related. This one was done in fine silver, and it's about, again, 2.5 inches tall. This one was done in copper, and I chased the exterior, created that form, and then used palladium leaf which is a metal similar to gold and platinum, and leaf the inside of the vessel to differentiate that interior exterior. Another piece I did, which is different than the ones you've seen so far, all the other pieces have been raised from a central point or a single point. This was raised from 3 points. So I started hammering around this point, hammering around that point, and that point. Once I got past here, I hammered it as if it were one piece. That was a really technically difficult piece to make, although it looks relatively simple.
Do you sketch these designs out, or are they all freestyle?
I was taught sketch it out. I did my first 3 or 4 pieces. Then after that, I got lazy and it's in my head, and it often changes as I progress. So sometimes I draw them when I'm finished, so they look very much like what I drew or what I raised, yes.
Where is that available? So someone may want to purchase that. That's gorgeous.
Well, they're gonna have to talk to someone else. No, I make my work because I enjoy making it, and then when I'm finished making it, I enjoy looking at it. So I make these things for myself, but I do enjoy sharing them with people. I put them in shows. I have them as an exhibit. So if you ever want to see them, you can always come to my house and take a look as well.
Mary Beth, your wife here, enjoys it. So we go to your house for this.
To a point, she enjoys it, yeah. I've got one room in the house where I can have all this stuff. It's called the brown room, because almost everything in it is brown.
How long? She just put out for a month and somebody.
There we go. Again, another piece that I did, this is about 5 inches in diameter. Hammered it out into the form, filled it with wax. Then I drew what actually was 4 overlapping, almost stylized clover leaves all over and then hammered them in and then stippled them with a punch. Another thing I've done is use fold forming to create volume. I'll show you some examples here. This is a fold form canister. And when I say fold form, what one does is take a piece of copper or other metal, folds it, and then hammers the crease very tightly, opens it back up, then folds it somewhere else, hammer that crease in, and you can do that over and over again. So these are all creases. This is one of the creases, this is one of the creases, this is one of the creases. And then once I open it up, I create a rectangle, take that rectangle, form a cylinder, solder that edge of the cylinder, solder a bottom on it, and make a top. So that's the process here. So,
Which of the metals is easiest to work with?
which is easy? Well, this takes less time than raising, because the raising process is very time consuming. This could do very quickly.
But this, as far as copper, the silver metal is easier to work with.
Oh, well, copper and fine silver work very much the same. Sterling silver is harder to work than copper or fine silver, and brass is similar to sterling. At least I find that in raising. This is another canister. This one's larger. The last one was about 3 inches tall. This is about 6 inches tall. This is another one. This is one piece I've sold, and I've regretted selling it, but I did get talked out of it. Another lidded form. I made the lid first, and then I made the bottom for it. There's another lidded form with a pierced top. Yeah, this is a candle holder, and again, it has a pierced top that's about 3 inches tall. Next, I want to shift to lighting, which is out on exhibit there, but all the lighting was inspired by the arts and crafts movement of the early 20th century. This particular piece was designed by Harvey Ellis for Gustav Stickley, and I was in an antique show and I bought this shade, and then I built a lantern around it. And this lantern is fairly large. It weighs about 35 pounds. It's made very heavy copper. And that's actually the 4th piece I made here at the center. And that's the one where I was told, if you want to continue making things like this, you've got to take basic jewelry, because this required a lot of riveting, soldering, etc. This is a lamp that was inspired by the work of Dirk van Erp, who was a coppersmith on the West Coast in San Francisco, worked at the turn of the last century up into the 30s. This is another lamp, similar to the one you just saw, a little larger. It's also out on display. This is the lamp with the shade off. So again, I raised the bottom, just like I raised all those other vessels you saw, and then I fabricated these pieces to hold the socket, and the shade rests on that top piece. I got into drinking vessels and barware because I enjoy beer and wine and spirits. And this is a beer stein that I made, raised the bottom in copper, flat sheet of copper, single sheet, and then I raised a piece of pewter to fit inside the copper stein, rolled the edges over, made the lid. The lid is actually showing a labyrinth, one way in, no way out. So I call this my last call beer stein. And the labyrinth is actually from the floor of the cathedral in Chartres. I borrowed a design there.
Do all your pieces have names?
Not all of them, no. This one, for example, doesn't. It's just a drinking cup. It holds about 14 ounces of beer. And I tried to mimic foam dripping over the side of the glass. Or the
Franco,
cup.
your work is so labor intensive. I can tell that, you spend a lot of care. You're very meticulous. I think I can understand why you don't sell things, because the price you'd have to ask to make it worth your while would just be.
And that's a good point. I want to keep them. I like them. I made them because I wanted them. And then I've had friends that have wanted to buy things, and I finally, like 4 different friends, I've just made something and given it to them because I wouldn't know what to ask, frankly. It's just an awkward situation. So,
Because how much do you put on your hourly rate? First of all, when you do that, then
Exactly.
it's going to skyrocket the price.
Exactly. This is a whiskey glass. It's a whiskey glass as well. It's about this tall. I call it heavy drinker because this thing weighs about almost a half a pound. But it's brass, copper, and pewter. This one I made for a friend who drank a bit too much. It's a Scotch snifter, and I affixed 6 sterling silver spikes around the exterior that are very sharp. And if you look at the interior, sterling silver, and then I have a copper spike that sticks straight up and just touches your lip ever so slightly. And you can drink out of this. I've done it, but if you have more than 1 or 2, it's dangerous. So I thought it was a way of modulating his drinking habits. No. In fact, he lives in Hawaii. I was going to send it to him, and he said, "Don't bother. I can work my way around it." So this is a glass, or actually a cup I made for Manhattans. And in this one, what I did is I inlaid some silver here. And these are, if you know International Morse code, dot, dash, dot, dot, dash, dot, 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 dash, dot. Well, I have initials that go around the outside of this, and one of them is my 2 sons' initials and my initials. So that's what this is. And I call it Talkin' Code. That's the name of that piece. This is a jigger for mixing drinks made out of fine silver. Okay, here are just some vases, hammer chased, fairly simple forms, no interior embellishment. This one's in brass. It's about 8 inches tall, a close-up of that. And again, brass is a little harder to work than copper. I had to anneal it over and over. Yes, Razi?
So you already know, but you're beyond fantabulous.
I'm sorry, what?
You are beyond fantabulous.
Oh.
Fantabulous.
Okay.
He said he don't know what that is, but you'll understand. Your work is amazing.
Thank you. And this piece, made in the same way, I filled it with wax, hammered the outside, and when I've shown this to people, it's called War or Peace. And the reason I call that War or Peace may seem enigmatic, but some people look at that and see a hand grenade. And some people look at it and see a turtle. So I thought an appropriate title would be War Peace. And then a couple years ago, I started making reliquaries for animals. This is the first one I made. Again, reliquaries are containers, often associated with the Catholic Church, in which pieces of blood of a saint, or a bone of a saint, or a piece of the true cross, whatever, are commemorated and put in a special place. I decided to do reliquaries for animals. And this is the first one I did, is a reliquary for the honeybee. There's the bee inside. And I tend to obscure what's going on, so you have to pick it up and look at it to figure out what's there. But this is with the top off. And these are actual bee wings that you see affixed to that bee. And it appears to be floating in space.
Do that.
I'm sorry?
How did you make it appear?
I have a rod coming up that's gold colored, so you can't really see it, and it's obscured by the bee itself. A friend of mine, I went to grad school in Kent, saw that, really liked it, so he called me one day and said, hey, I have a bat skeleton. And he said, you want to make another reliquary? And I thought, one's enough. And I thought, okay, I'll try it. So I made this, and again, it's a reliquary for the little brown bat. This is what it looks like from the front. The bat skeleton, that's an actual bat skeleton, appears to be floating in space. And I used just a very small wire to hold it up. And then I tried to create the impression of a cave. My friend called me again after he saw that one, said, I have a toad skeleton. This is the American toad, Bufo americanus. So I made this for that. This is what it looks like from the top. I used ginkgo leaves, pierced lid. And then if you take the lid off, you see a skeleton of a toad resting on a golden ginkgo leaf.
Why animals?
Well, all those animals, what they have in common is they're all beneficial to mankind. They're pollinators, they eat insects, etc. And we're busy decimating them, either by restricting their habitat or using pesticides or climate change. So I just thought it was a way of commemorating the notion of animals that are beneficial to us and how we treat them. Some of my recent work, I just finished a couple weeks ago downstairs in class, and it is, I call it Oculus Redux. The reason for that is, if you look at this upper part, it appears to be a dome. And I'd been talking with a friend about architecture and domes. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, oh, well, if you have a dome in architecture and there's an opening in it, it's called an oculus. And then I thought, well, how about doubling down on that and putting an oculus means eye in Latin. Why not put another eye in, and hence the name Oculus Redux. And again, that eye, I tried to make it appear to be floating. That's what it looks like as you look straight down. And that is a prosthetic eye that I happen to have. All right. Some other recent work. This is the bolo tie showing a crow skull. There's a close-up of that. This was raised, no repoussé. It was all done from one side. This was going to be a lid for that prior piece I showed you, but then I decided not to put a lid on it and keep it open. So I had a lid, and I decided to make a bolo tie out of it. So I had another prosthetic eye and put that in there.
Have you ever worn that?
I have, yes. I wore it to a coffee shop where I play chess, and everybody wanted one. But all right, so now what I want to do is turn my attention to raising, and I'll show you a slide here. This is how I do this stuff, and I'll show a little bit more here, but this is me in my backyard with that set up. So you mentioned repetitive process. This is what one does. And if you remember the piece that I said was the reliquary for the honeybee, that's that piece. And it took many, many iterations of hammering like that to get it into the form. this is what I'm actually doing. This is called a raising stake, in this case a T-stake. I'm holding metal at about a 20 to 30 degree angle, and I'm striking the metal just above the point of contact, which pushes the metal down to the stake, rotating it, doing it again and again. That's the process of raising. And this is that same piece a little farther along. And this is that piece as I continue to work up towards the top. So I'm going to stop there. It says the end, but I'm not finished yet. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was planning to wait till the actual end. Will you teach me, please?
Someday I'm going to do a workshop or a class here. I've been thinking of doing, and I hope to do that soon. So I'm going to set this down. And now what I want to show you is the raising process. So everything starts with a flat sheet of copper. So I draw a circle on it. Cut the circle out. The next step is what's called sinking. And I hit the metal from what would be the inside. And I just do that once, and it's just to get the metal moving in the right direction. I want it to move this way. It's actually a thinning process. From there on, I'm raising. So this is the next step. I raise it once. I raise it again. That's what it looks like. Continues to create more volume. More volume. This is the 8th time that I've hammered that from the center to the edge. And now I'm at this point. So what I'm going to do is set the microphone down for a minute, and I'll show you what I do from here. Again, this is a raising stake. This is a raising hammer. I place this on here. I have an angle of space between the raising hammer. My point of contact is right here, and I hammer it there. Shape. They're now changing.
Times do you go around there? As many as it's.
Sorry?
How many times do you rotate that?
Again, I rotate and hit it until I get to the edge. So it depends on how large the piece is.
Do you work one piece to completion, Franco, or do you have multiple projects going at a time?
Sometimes I do just one at a time. Other times I have 3 or 4 things going on at once. Okay, what I'm going to do now is pass this around. When I started, these two were the same shape when I started hammering this. So now you can see the difference, a 1 round of raising, what it has done in changing the shape of that piece. And you can continue that and bring that thing all the way in. As long as you can get a stake inside to support it, you can take it, make a very close, small opening. Yes?
So you used 2 different types of hammer. What was the last hammer doing?
Yeah, the last hammer is a rawhide hammer, and it's just used to, in French, it's called bouging. It's like regulating the surface because you have some lumps, and it's just a way of smoothing it out. Yeah. Yes?
How do you calculate what size you need to start with to get what you're gonna
That's a
get
great
at.
question, and I was gonna address that and I forgot, so I'm glad you asked. Okay, the general rule of thumb is if you wanna make, for example, a glass that's 4 inches tall and the maximum height is 4, and the maximum width is 2, you need to start with a disc that's 6 inches in diameter. In other words, height plus width equals the diameter of your initial piece. That's a general rule. If you do some crazy shapes, you've got to adjust that a little bit. Okay?
Can you also talk a little bit about the annealing process for everybody?
Oh, yes, yeah.
For doing
Right.
fundamental.
Between every one of these steps, you have to anneal. In other words, that copper gets hard as you hammer it. It gets brittle. If you keep hammering it, it will crack. So you have to bring that copper up to an annealing temperature. Every metal has its own annealing temperature, and you have to do that between iterations. Also, I wanted to mention the initial circle was 4 inches in diameter. If you remember your geometry, the circumference then would be 3.14 times 4 inches, which is roughly 12.6 inches. That piece that Eric has in his hand right now, the diameter of the opening is now 2 3/4 inches. So your circumference went from 12 inches, 12 and a half, and now it's 8.6 inches. So you've lost 4 inches in circumference from the beginning to that point. And what's happening is the metal is thickening. People often ask me as I'm doing this, if I'm demonstrating, are you thinning the metal? It's actually the opposite. As you go towards the edge, the metal thickens. And there's one piece I have out there on display that started as a 14-inch diameter disc, and the thickness doubled. It doubled in thickness by the time I was finished. Okay, so any questions about this process? I'm looking at the time here. Oh, yeah.
Lines on there, lines, the black lines, is
Oh,
that
yeah.
like you start hitting and then you keep going?
The lines are there just as a guide, so I know where I've hammered and where I'm going. I also draw a vertical line. Well, I'll call it vertical line. It's vertical now. A line that lets me know where I started and where I end. I can do this without these lines, but I find them very useful to keep me on track. So, yeah, that's what they're for.
And you said that metal gets thicker.
Yes.
If you start the middle and go out with it, I can see it getting thicker at the edges. But you're saying even the bottom gets thicker?
The only thinning that occurs is that very first step. It's called sinking, when you hammer into the metal, into the middle of the metal. But you only do it once, so it has almost no effect on the thickness of the metal. After that, everything is done from the outside, and you're holding it against a stake, and you're actually compressing, thickening the metal with every hit. So, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So when you do your designs, like the bird skull or any of them, when they're not the folded form, you're doing like a version of raising that's more precise and it's almost like engraving, but
Well,
is that what it is?
for this piece in particular, it started out as a flat sheet like the rest of this. I knew I wanted the top of the skull to be the farthest up, or the most relief. So I started at that point. I didn't hammer there, but I hammered around that. And then I hammered in an oval fashion to create essentially the skull without any detail. It was just a lump that stuck out of the piece of copper, shaped kind of what I'm showing here. And then I went back in, filled it with wax, and hammered in the detail with a chasing tool. Yeah. All right, I want to show you real quickly just on this. Around it. You asked about the lines earlier? When you want to change the shape of a piece, depending on which line you start with, that will change the angle of the exterior. For example, if I wanted from this point to this point to go like this, I would start hammering here, if that makes sense. But if I hammer here every time, what I'll end up is a hemisphere. If I hammer here and then here and here and here, I just bring the piece up into a circle. But if I wanted to change angles like this and then go up, then I have to start hammering it at different places when I start each course. Show you real quickly a course on this, and then I'll pass it around and you'll see what 1 or 2 courses do on this. I'm stopping there, but what I wanted to illustrate is this is how it starts changing. So if I wanted to make something with an opening that was maybe 3 inches at the top of this vessel, I've got to do what I'm doing here about 16 times from this point all the way to the edge with annealing in between. So it's, again, very time consuming. And then if I want to add decorative detail on top of that when it's finished, you end up hammering a piece tens of thousands of times, literally. But here you can, I'll pass this around, you can see what just a couple courses does to the shape of that piece. Any questions about the raising process?
Heating it up, is that what you're talking about?
Different metals have different annealing temperatures. Pewter is one of the most interesting metals. The annealing temperature for pewter is room temperature, which means you don't have to do anything, but you have to let it rest. The first time I raised a piece of pewter, I thought, wow, I can just keep hammering. Well, it turns almost to rubber. I mean, it just goes everywhere. And I talked to a friend who had done it before, and he said, oh, what you need to do is just let it rest. So just set it aside. It kind of finds its molecular structure, and then you can start over again.
Oh, when you do, you go 20 minutes or half hour?
Oh, yeah, half hour is plenty of time. What you're doing, again, when you're hammering like that, you're compressing the molecules together. So the metal becomes brittle. When you anneal, the metal relaxes, those molecules reestablish themselves in a relaxed state, and then the metal becomes malleable.
What's the hardest metal to work with?
Steel is pretty hard, but people do this same thing with steel. I have a friend that raises steel bowls, and he uses 1/8-inch thick steel. It just, it's hard. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you use any dies or molds or anything to hammer or?
No, I generally do not. Sometimes that one necklace I showed, it's a dapping tool. It's just a piece of steel with a hemisphere, and you can push the metal into it. But for large pieces, you can get any shape you want with a single raising stake by changing the angle of the metal that you're holding against a stake, and then also how you hit that metal. So these are very versatile. There's no mold that I'm pushing the metal against to create the shape. And you'll see if you go out and take a look later, there's a whole variety of shapes, and they're all done with that stake, and almost all of them.
Is that a right-hand hammer or left-hand?
Depends on what day of the week it is. No, I'm
Franco, where do you purchase all this metal?
Oh, metal. Sometimes I buy things on eBay because I'm cheap. You can actually buy eBay or pieces of copper on eBay that are like a charger or a metal plate, and then I just repurpose them. I just change the shape entirely. It's cheaper than buying new copper, but I also buy new copper. I buy it. There are a number of suppliers here in town, even where you can buy the copper. Workhaven has it.
Go get a catalytic converter and.
Haven't tried that. Yeah. And then silver is a little more expensive. Most of my work is in copper, but lately I've been trying to work more in silver. It's a very wonderful material to hammer. Yeah.
Hammer on silver?
I'm sorry?
You hammer on silver without marring it?
Well, you mar it, but then at the very end, you can do what's called planishing. So once I've hammered a piece and it's fairly rough, you can put it against a metal form and you use a hammer that has a very flat surface, very polished surface, and you hold that piece of silver against a stake or a form, and you hammer, not in one, you don't want to hammer in one place more than once because you're going to spread the metal, but you keep moving that metal very slowly and tap, 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 and you can come up with a mirror finish. It'll eliminate all the marring from the raising process that you created. I tend not to planish a lot because I do like to see my hammer marks. I think for me they're part of the decorative process or the decorative element of the piece. But I've done pieces where I've eliminated the hammer marks.
Oh, Franco, this was amazing. Thank you, thank you. And you're going to lead us into the gallery? I love gallery and shows, so let us.
All right, well, I'm going to head down this way, and I'm going to stop here and show you a few pieces that basically involve chasing. So all of these forms were raised using the process that I demonstrated in the other room. And after I achieved the shape that I wanted, I filled each of these forms with wax, microcrystalline wax. And in 4 of them, the only tool I used to create the designs you see on the outside were hammers. So that's called hammer chasing. The one piece that has the gold leaf interior, in addition to using a hammer on the exterior for design, I also use chasing tools, a variety of shapes and sizes of chasing tools. Okay, moving down this way, this is a group of work that really is functional. Everything here can be used to drink with or to mix drinks. So I have a cocktail shaker. I have 3 different cups here. They're copper. And in the interior, I have lead-free pewter. This is a beer stein. Again, copper and pewter. 5 pieces that are here in this area are all made of silver. 3 of them are made from fine silver. That's pure silver. The cordial cups, the pair there, are made of 960 silver, meaning that it's 96% silver and 4% copper. Another cup here I mentioned during my talk with the spikes. That was specifically to help a friend slow down his drinking. The spikes are intended to deter one from drinking too much. Okay, we can move down this way. I mentioned some of the reliquaries that I've made. There are 4 reliquaries here. We have a reliquary for the American toad, a reliquary for the honeybee, a reliquary for the paper wasp, and this one is the reliquary for the little brown bat. This piece in silver, fine silver, I just finished a week or so ago. It's called Oculus Redux. a couple of canes that I've made. This one is a mushroom hunting cane. And this other one was made for a friend of mine who I took my first jewelry class with here, Hal Stevens. And then just a few other oddball things. I have an hourglass here, a candle holder that was made from scrap metal. That was made from a single piece of copper. Okay. And over here, I have some lighting. Again, this was inspired by the arts and crafts movement of the early 20th century. The pieces are raised, the bases are raised from copper, flat sheets of copper. This one in particular has, again, a raised copper base. And then I made the shade using sheet mica, which is this material. It's translucent. It comes in a variety of colors. And I think it makes a very nice low light statement in a room setting. So that's what this is. Up on a wall, I have a barometer. I made the holder for the barometer, a lantern, a candlestick, and then a floor lamp. So,
Tell us about the lantern. It's so historical.
well, that lantern, again, it was designed in 1903 by Harvey Ellis. He was an architect who worked for Gustav Stickley in New York City, making craftsman furniture, but also lighting fixtures. And he designed that piece. I've always been taken by it. Well, I happened to be at an antique show here in town, and I found that shade. That shade is about 7 inches in diameter, 9 inches tall. So it's a little larger than the original shade and the one that Harvey Ellis made. I had to adjust the proportions, but I made the copper to fit the shade. And that's very heavy copper. It's 1/8 inch thick copper. I made the chain. I made the chain in the same way they make jump rings in jewelry class, where you wrap wire around a rod. I wrapped a fairly heavy copper rod around a hammer handle, wrapped it up, and then I sawed through the coil that I made and had individual links, which I spread, put together, and then closed up. So that's, again, I made that here. That was the 4th piece I made here at the Cultural Arts Center. But
Are the links soldered shut, or are they just like?
the question was, are they soldered shut? No, I was going to solder them, but when I pushed them back together, since I used a really fine jeweler saw, there was almost no space between them, and solder would have been superfluous because it really wouldn't have served any function. So yeah, they are not soldered. But mentioning solder, this is where I was told you need to take a basic jewelry class. So I took a basic jewelry class so I could learn to solder. I could learn to forge in a different way and rivet, because there are a number of rivets in the top of that piece as well. In fact, some of those rivets aren't real rivets. Since I didn't know how to make them, I actually took screws and made them look like rivets. So that's where I was told you really need to learn how to rivet. So, any other questions about any of those? Yes.
What class were you in when you made that, if not jewelry class?
That was just a beginning jewelry class. Yeah, downstairs, and yeah, that was 12 years ago, roughly. Yeah. Any other questions we have?
Thinking the Ohio Historical Society, just loving that.
Yeah. Well, again, I was exposed to a lot of artifacts, historical artifacts through time on exhibit. So every day I walk by exhibits, and seeing all that is visually stimulating. And I'm sure some of that's reflected in a way I'm not even conscious of in my work. But in particular, several of my vessel forms mimic prehistoric ceramic pots. One in particular, a Hopewell pot, it was 4-footed, and I made one 3-footed. But if you take that 3-footed pot that I made that's here. Hopewell made one very similar to that, except that it had 4 feet. So, yeah.
Mary Beth, wife of this amazing artist.
Hear from you about your experience in viewing this beautiful art.
Well, I love everything that Franco's produced. I've been witness to most of the evolution of his work over time. I particularly love the lantern and the lamps that he's made, and also the reliquaries. I think that's a very nice gesture.
Do you ever make requests, like you'd like him to make a certain thing?
I think the jigger, I had some input on the little jigger that he made, the silver jigger.
If I may, yes. I often, as I'm making something, I will ask Mary Beth for suggestions or advice. I like to bounce ideas off people, so I bounce ideas off people here during my classes as well. Christine, who teaches the jewelry class that I take, I often ask her, particularly for design concepts and so on. So it's always good to work around other people because you influence them and they influence you. So I've had lots of good experience here with input and encouragement and feedback from other students and instructors.
Thank you, everyone, for celebrating Franco Ruffini, amazing artist. Yes.